Now I need your support. Who of you knows where you can look for the weather 40 years ago? Not even 1% of the audience in attendance. Who knows what warming stripes are? That's probably just as few and probably the same people. And who wants to know if there has been more snow in history? Yeah, probably all of you. You won't get to know this in this talk, but you get to know how you can find out. So this is what Manuel will show you, how you can use public climate data. Big applause for Manuel. Hi everyone, and welcome, and a very good morning for you. 2 years ago, I was allowed to talk here about how you can use satellite data to see how mass data changes in Greenland, for instance, so how ice melts, or how we are using too much groundwater in a few regions of the world. Usually I'm working locally, which means I want to know what the gravity is, like little g exactly here. So sun, moon and stars usually are an annoyance and I can easily ignore them. So from a measurement perspective, atmosphere is very annoying, but usually we can change a lot about that. So for myself, I usually calculate the effect of the atmosphere changing in time. So the simplest way to do that is just measure it myself. This is my little gravimeter, so I can measure how the gravity changes over time. And this is something that measures air pressure over time. So I subtract the standard air pressure and then have a delta air pressure. So by a rule of thumb, I usually have 3 nanometers per second squared per hectopascal. Then I have the correction I need to know over time. Well, almost. Well, of course, atmosphere, air pressure isn't exactly measured at only this one point. So say I'm measuring 1000 hectopascal, and then I have lots of vapor over me. This will probably be not the same. So just imagine there's just imagine the water in the atmosphere, the humidity, it has mass, so it has effects on the local gravity coefficient, and so it contributes to my measurements. So you can do a level 2 correction to find how the atmosphere layers above me look in my climate model. For example, one of my results is here on the right. The plot on the upper right shows the atmosphere height until 50 kilometers. It's separated into 37 layers. I can do this into 80 kilometers if I want to. And according to a few variables from my climate model with humidity, temperature, air pressure, I can calculate the density of the atmosphere. If I know the geometry of these atmosphere layers, so I can calculate the attraction of this atmosphere and how this draws up the gravity coefficient. Usually we have something like 9.81 meters per second squared. So we are calculating until the 9th floating point, which we can do. And if we look into this on the x-axis with time and the y-axis the height, so the upper plot, then each of the Then you see in the individual layers you have something like plus minus 15 nanometers per second squared. And in the lower layers you have something like positive attraction, and over that you have negative contributions. So we have success. I have a better correction than before. You can see this in lots of comparisons. And now you're rightfully questioning, this is a very special problem you have. Yeah, that's true, but what do we do with this? I want to talk about the huge data we have. So positive data volumes you can use. I'm talking about various services, where there are weather and climate data, and you can use it for your own projects. So I'm talking about FTP servers with ASCII data. I'm talking about APIs for data download with toolboxes to download and analyze. And I don't know if we get to the third point. There will be a little color in my presentation before this. So I'm showing what I found in this data because I'm a user of this data. So the description cannot be complete, even close, but there was a nice talk about climate modeling, which I can recommend it. They were much more detailed in describing this, and with her descriptions, I cannot do this in this scale. And all this is also extensively documented. Everything I'm talking about is in the Fahrplan. There's a document with all these services, with all these resources. And if you're looking for 3063_klima on GitHub, you can find the services I use to download this data and produce these plots.
Okay, so let's start with measuring yourself. It usually works quite good, but usually because it's quite good because it's usually working with computers with Windows PCs. So you have to look, oh, is there maybe someone else who made these data or measured this data? So there's the German forecast service. They create like their own climate models themselves. So this is just weather data which I can visualize. They will be distributed on different channels. The first one is the Climate Data Center portal. It's an interactive web tool. So there I can click which parameters do I want to know, and then I can click onto a map, which station I want to know, and then I get the data. So there are also some interfaces. There are also some web services available, and then you can get data where. I don't want to talk more about this. So I said there will be ASCII files from a FTP server, so let's take a closer look at this. So there are a lot of stations with time series and metadata and documentation and rasterized data. In this data service, there's metadata to used measurement equipment and much more. So we have an overview of all the stations available of the German weather service. The service itself also provides data from Europe. 500 of these stations have contributed data in this month. So I want to talk about the air temperature in the height of 2 meters above ground. So when you look at these time series, they're about 25 data. And there's also on the very right, there's data available from more than 120 years. That's Potsdam. So there you can download the data of the temperature, because the daily measurements are just like a thick blue band. I created the middle. So there are also some colder months, and at the end of the year there are like more stuff. And the year middle increases. So you see that the median increases slowly. So the usual way to display this are the warming stripes. So if you looked at the things of Friday for Future, you see in the background blue, white, red stripes, which so you can get this from the yearly averages. So so you take the average. So this was in the case of Potsdam, it's 8.7 degrees Celsius. And then you have the upper time series, the average plus minus 2 and 2.5 degrees, and the below colors scale is limited to plus minus 2, 2.5 degrees. So in the lower scale you get blue, deep blue scales, and the upper values you get red. So I created these with show your stripes. So you go to the site, and then you see like the first stripe you see is for the global temperature. Interesting is the information. It tells you where the data actually comes from. So let's look at as us, Europe, and then Germany. So the build looks roughly as we had before. So it shows annual average temperatures from Germany from 1881 until 2018 using the data from the German Weather Service. So when you do this for a different region, you get different information. So there's obviously data available at the German Weather Service from back to 1800 something. So everyone could go there and takes some coordinates and thinks, okay, how does this look like for my favorite place? So someone had this idea before with this following article. So they created a tool where you can put in your favorite place, for example, Leipzig, and then you get this stripe. So you see. So when you look at this thing at the lowest line, it's inspired by Ed Hawkins. The source is this German Weather Service, that's the time series. And when you click on Methodic, you see what I actually told you just before. So that actually I put in Leipzig and not the actual coordinates. So let's have a quick look at this data set. So it's surface data, so there are a lot of variables. So I show you the air temperature in this animation. So in every pixel is 1 × 1 kilometer. That's the resolution of this data set. And for every pixel, the average is subtracted from the actual value. So the coordinates are unfortunately Gauss-Krüger. That's a rectangular coordinate system. It's quite difficult to interpolate there. So for the script you can get on GitHub, I changed these to geographically coordinates. So the surface data from the German Weather Dienst just it's quite interesting. So that was all just surface temperature. But I actually want the third dimension. So we need some climate models. And that's continuous.
Da haben eine Kollegin vor mir und ich uns entschieden für das European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasts. Der Name sagt,
so we decided on using the medium range weather forecast, European Center.
Deren Aufgabe ist Wettervorhersage.
Wunderschön.
Es ist gleichzeitig eine Forschungseinrichtung. Sie erstellen ihre eigenen Klimamodelle.
So that's a research service. They create their own climate model. So the models go back to 1997. So it's they want to try to enlarge it to 1950. So that's where I look for the weather when I don't want to look at the Tagesschau. In the Copernicus program, that's the EU program for Earth research. So that you can find at copernicus.eu. So the Copernicus program offers free access to three stuff. One thing they offer is security, but so let's have a look at this climate change service.
I want to demonstrate something.
Da wird man begrüßt mit Welcome to the Climate Data Store, also Store im Sinne von Speicher.
You're welcome. So, and you to the climate data store, and you have 3 buttons. And we'll check out on the first and the second one. So the most actual model is ERA 5, and it's the resolution is 25 degree to 25 degree.
So if you're talking about soil humidity and you want to talk about something like that, then you need ERA 5 land. By standard, they're giving you hourly and monthly values from today and until 105 days to go. The data can be accessed with NetCDF and NetCDF and GRIP data format, and then you can use MATLAB or whatever you want to use for this. No, I don't want to install all of this and download all this data, so the climate data store helps us with this. So Copernicus, there's an online toolbox to use. Sorry, it was already loaded. On the left side, you see what has already been written by people. And you see the documentation of those functions. Not as important right now. So I'm pressing play because this takes a while. This is accessible over the Fahrplan. This can take 10 to 20 minutes. I used it before. The script on its own has a part where I define what I want to have, so 3 climate variables, 2 meter temperature, snow depth, and total precipitation. This is variables I want to talk about soon. Now I'm defining coordinates where I want to have this plot. This is Leipzig. And now I'm defining the grid I want to use, so 0.25 degrees. If I'm doing a higher resolution, then data access will be smaller. I'm taking all years, all months I can use. And now I looked at the area. This is Germany. If I want to use a bigger area, this will probably take a while. And if we're talking about monthly data, this can take 6 or 12 hours until this is even downloaded. So we see the result, how it's presented here. So you can zoom into this and look into segments. We talked about 3 different variables. So now we're looking into snow depth. So this is water equivalent. So just imagine the snow has molten completely. So we use the water equivalent. And then we see how much meter this will be over our cell in this grid. And if I downloaded the data for other coordinates as well, then I can also change the coordinates. But I have only downloaded German data before, so I can't change them right now. So I can plot this data. I don't need to download the data myself. I only need to get a grip on this scripting language. So let's look into the data catalog, because my calculations are too complex to do it in this toolbox. So this is how you get also more insight into what's actually there. This climate data store doesn't only have the ERA 5 data, it has a few other products too. For instance, Arctic sea routes, how did it develop for naval navigation? Here's the era 5. This is all sorts of positions for era 5 we have. So this is hourly atmosphere parameters since 1970 until today, today 5 days ago. If you're installing a few things, you can download this with that, and with bigger downloads, you might want to think of the download policy, because they recommend to do it in monthly bulks, because you will be in the download queue for a few days if you don't do that. And on the right, you see the scrolling bar. It's small. This is the list of all parameters which are there. It's quite a few. But we do know what we want. Here, the things are chosen that I already used. So 2 meter temperature, the total precipitation, and air pressure. For other variables, this has been sorted by topic. Then you can click through time ranges, data points in the time. And now if you had your own Python script, then with show API request, you can see how you can request this in Python to get this data set that I now clicked for. If I want to do this with the toolbox that I just showed you, then you look into show toolbox requests, and then this is what you get, and you can just copy paste it into your toolbox code. So you don't need to do this by hand. And if you just want a download link, you say submit form. And then you can see what you wanted to download. And then I see, okay, I already wanted to download this. Depending on the data size, this can take a few hours or maybe even a day. In particular, until the data has been collected and until it's ready to be downloaded. If you want the highest resolution data, this can be on magnet band, so this can take a while. Then there's a few topics that have already been prepared, pre-analyzed. For instance, the size of the Arctic ice and how it's covering the sea. So there's applications who can use live data for this because they are prepared. And you see, I'm always looking at the same page. I'm just using different tabs. We're seeing applications. So when is the Northeast Passage free of ice? And you see this gets longer and longer every year. Survivability for a specific mosquito in Europe. So when will tropical illnesses come into Europe? But I'm a climate researcher, so let's look into the era 5 Explorer. This is presenting us with a map. Or let me click into what I already loaded. Then you have a map. This is a global map. You can zoom, you can look for the place you want to understand, where you want to have the climate data of the last 40 years. And then on the right you see the result. The first plot shows, for these 40 years, the monthly average of temperature, the minimal and maximal daily values. So if you want to travel somewhere or get to work and you don't know how the weather gets in March, you can just have it visualized for you. This is what we already talked about. And now for the long-term evolution on this place, I clicked onto Leipzig. And then we see the whole time series and take a 5-year average. Then we see summer days, tropical nights, and frost days. So frost days are the ones with temperatures below 0 degrees, and tropical nights the ones where the night had at least 20 degrees. Within these 40 years, you can see the number of summer days increased, so the average temperature has been higher than 25 degrees Celsius, and the frost nights get fewer. And what you can actually see, even though it's quite only a few so far, you see that the tropical nights are also increasing in number. So this is what came from the Climate Data Store and the Era 5 model for different topics you might want to have. For this stuff you want to program yourself, I said I had a few example scripts. You can look into those. And there's a few example applications you can also use like these. So if the demo doesn't work, let's skip these slides. The last thing, can also look into the missions of NASA and ESA. This is the NASA EOS-DIS, the Earth Observing System Data and Information System. Someone who has worked with NASA data before knows they're not anymore freely downloadable. You need a user ID to get to the earlier archives. The visualization tool is Worldview. You can, it's public. You can just use the source code and build it yourself on your own local platform and then download this data. Now let's click for this, and then you see you already have a topical segmentation with a few pre-prepared analyses, which are supposed to show you what this visualization tool can do for you. In the left column, you see the several layers you want to have. It's something like 900. For time reasons, let's just look into California and British Columbia wildfires, so Canada and USA. You see the satellite image, you see the description on the right, and you see the smoke, how it's traveling over the continent. And this is combined with several satellite missions. And each point has been identified. So this fires have been identified with MODIS, moderate spectrography, something. And the rest of this you can look into yourself. And the deciding feature is that you can actually scroll through time and scroll back. And so you can actually produce an animation. So if you look into one specific value that interests you, so now here the fires, or you're looking for aerosols or temperature, you can play a few days with these. The data that's in the background here is free for download. You need an account, but as far as I know, this is not a problematic thing. So as a summary, there is a big treasure of data we can use, which is explicitly for public usage. The hurdle to get into this is not that high. It's FTP, it's ASCII data. So the biggest hurdle you have is how you want to visualize or report and analyze this. Even if you don't want to program, you saw there's quite a few tools where you don't even need to be, where you don't need to program this to do the analysis. Which even show you what's possible. So the answer to the question, has there been more snow in the past? Then now every one of you knows how to research the answer for this. The resources on the Fahrplan. On GitHub, you have the fitting resources, and you can talk to me or via DECT and email. Thanks for listening to the English translation of this talk for public climate data on the 36th Chaos Communication Congress. Your translators were Vasago and
Babla.
We appreciate your feedback. Please email us at hello@c3lingo and use C3T as a hashtag on Twitter. And now for question and answers.
Wer von euch hat Fragen? Hände hoch und ran an die Mikrofone. Keine Fragen aus dem Internet?
Nee.
Das Mikrofon Nummer 9, bitte.
Micro 9 number, please. On slide 12, you had Germany with a kilometer times kilometer resolution, and there was like a red point in Nordrhein-Westfalen. Do you know what that is?
Also diese Daten sind interpoliert aus
I don't know enough about this. This data is from
deutsche Wetterdienst zu der Zeit die
observations that stations had and however the German weather service has been called at the time.
Beschreibung des Produktes auf dem Server
In the description of the product on the server,
inklusive den relevanten
you,
Literatur.
you get further information for the relevant literature.
Mikrofon Nummer 3, bitte.
Thanks for the talk, and thanks for the cool sources. I have a question to your field of science. So in the beginning of your slides, you argued that there are effects in the atmosphere which decrease the Earth gravitation. No, increasing. So the scale goes in both directions. How is this happening?
This is since we can't remove the atmosphere and since we don't want to do that. We usually do the calculations with a constant atmosphere, a normal atmosphere, 1000 hectopascal. And then you can talk about what station has what kind of expected pressure. So if I'm doing this probably at zero level, at sea level, then I'm expecting 1020 hectopascal. So this is a difference of 20 nanometers per second squared. This is the attraction we get from air because air has mass of its own, and this is giving pressure onto the Earth's surface. And if I have a high pressure zone, then the surface will not have will have a lot of pressure, and in a low pressure environment it will have little pressure. So we need to correct for a bit. As I said, this is a rule of thumb. So with methods, as I talked about, with the atmosphere measuring it, we have a better correction. So let's imagine we're at the coast or at the sea, then we have a better correlation with my method, with the sea level. So more water is more gravity, less water is less gravity.
Can you give us can you give us a grab on the measurement of the speed? How does that? How can we feel that?
That doesn't have anything to do with Earth rotation. We're just talking about little g, so the 9.81 meter per second squared. So how mass is held in the atmosphere. So how atmosphere is distributed over the Earth's surface has an effect on Earth rotation. But this is only a millisecond correction, depending on the mass distribution.
Macro 2, please. I also want to thank you. You said that downloading the data takes quite some time sometimes. Is that because of the size, or is it just because they need to get all the data?
Yeah, the last thing. Depending on how big the data collection is you want to have, it needs to be collected from different data servers. And that's when you're able to download it. So you have a bit of a time in the queue. It can be a few hours until the data has been collected. So let's talk about a gigabyte data set. This might be a month. Europe, 3 values over the height of the total height of the atmosphere. This is something like 10 gigabyte. So you can just query it once, and if you now query with the script a second time in the morning, then the server will now know, oh yeah, they already asked for this, so this will be faster then.
Mikrofon Nummer 1, bitte.
I also have a question about the weight net. How do we need this data, which is like in the 8th or 9th floating point number?
Beschäftigt sich mit der Entwicklung neuartiger Sensoren, also präzise
We're talking about new sensors, so high precision barometers.
Gerät, und dann schaue ich in die
So let's look into this precise device, and then we see this strange arc in your data. And I'm seeing, there's a strange arc in your data. Aren't you more precise? And then I need a more precise model for this data. So if there's a few things you can't directly measure but is of interest, so something like groundwater, and you're talking about the levels of where this water is, and the offices who are measuring this. If you don't have, if you're not in luck that there's an office who's actually doing these measurements, then you can do gravimetrics, and then you're doing that with high precision. But then you need these high correction models, and then you need these atmospheric models.
Is there also for these ground level values, are there public available data?
Yes, there are, but there's no such pages where this is all centralized. It's quite diverse from federal state to federal state. So I'm from Hanover. So there is a group in the city who are doing and collecting this, and then you can ask them for this if you're doing research on it, but yeah, usually this is a topic for the city you're in.
So this is all climate model data. So there's no one flying in 2 kilometers above and measures this. How are these calculated? Are they internally calculated? Are they before or after calculated?
So each of this is 5 days back. So the model is calculated with the data that happened until then. So until recently, this has been something like 30 days ago. And currently, you can assume that the data will change with a bit of delay. How such models are produced, this was very well explained in the climate modeling talk.
So when the data is calculated, does that mean so that they will be on the long term like corrected back into the past?
They do. They have every 10 years a correction of the former model, and then you usually have the two models, and then you take a value of the 1980s and look into the climate models and see are there any discrepancies. How this is done, I can't tell you in all this precision. If I now want to compare my results to the ones of a colleague a few decades ago, they can just take her model. And then I have the good resources that these models are usually accessible in parallel.
I wanted to ask if Europe is like leading in giving this data to the public, or are there other states or governments who so that everyone can use this data?
I can't tell you this in a big breadth. I'm quite sure there's quite a few other meteorological services doing this, like the German weather service. So something like ERA 5, which is reasonably public. For the American version, I would guess that this is the data service I showed to you, but precisely I can't conclusively answer this. For German models, I'm also not quite sure if all of these are publicly accessible. we use the RCFF because this is something I and a colleague of mine could just use. In particular, this model is labeled with not just commercial, but also public interest explicitly, so everyone is supposed to use this. So if I'm doing a commercial product with this, I'm not quite sure how this is allowed.
Einen großen Applaus.
Vielen Dank für die Aufmerksamkeit.